Welcome back to Learning Solidity. Now, in today's tutorial, I'm going to be going on a different path than usual, where we've been looking at Solidity for developing decentralized applications. Yes, we're still going to be looking at Solidity and decentralized applications as a whole, but we're going to now be taking it along a route of integrating these decentralized applications within a web interface or a web platform. Now, to do this in today's tutorial, what we're going to look at is some basic tools to allow us to interact with the Ethereum network. Now, the most common tool that you'll find with browser-based applications in the Ethereum network is a little tool called Metamask. Now, to get Metamask, you simply go to metamask.io, then you simply click on Get Chrome Extension, which will take you to the Chrome Extension store. Install it, and once installed, you'll have an icon in the top right hand corner which will look something like this. Now, this is a fresh install, so it's something that's you're going to have to obviously accept the terms and conditions for, and so forth. So that's what I'm kind of going to do straight away. So I'm going to accept those terms and conditions, scroll to the bottom of that, accept that. Now I'm going to create a password. Now I'm going to use this for testing purposes, so I'm never actually going to use this as sort of a live account. So I'm going to start by creating a password called test. So basically after this tutorial, I'm just going to delete this the seed that's generated from my password as well. So once you enter a password, you are then provided with a seed. Now, the reason I'm kind of showing you how to actually set this up is because we need the seed to actually be able to test with. And what I mean by that is, if we take the seed, as previously mentioned in other tutorials, we've been using the test RPC. Now, to actually use the test RPC with Metamask, we need the seed to actually align with the test RPC. Otherwise, the accounts you create will not have the necessary sort of the Ethereum or we available to us. So therefore, we won't be able to test them or sort of effectively, shall we say. So if I now kick up the test RPC, what you simply have to do to actually use this seed is simply type test RPC-M and then enter the seed or paste the seed in, hit enter. You'll be able to check it under the HD wallet and see that the seed is then displayed. Then you can simply state, I've copied it somewhere safe. It's not overly important to save this if you're only using it for testing purposes. If you're using it for live production purposes, do not forget to save that seed. So I've copied it. Now all I need to do is from the network dropdown, connect to localhost 8545, which is going to be the test RPC account. Now, once connected, as you can see, I now have 100 ether available to me. Without that seed, I have 0 ether. It will still work, but you obviously just don't have any ether. Now, from that, I can now interact with the test RPC as well as through the browser, essentially. So as you can see here, we have interactions with the actual test RPC from Metamask. Every few seconds, it gets the block by number. Okay. So let's start looking at little things that we can now do with the test RPC. And let me just bring up my snippet. There we go. Right. So now that test RPC is installed, I'm going to stay on the Metamask site and just show you a few things. So if I inspect the page and jump to console, I don't know how well you can see this, so I'm going to see if I can zoom in a little bit. There we go. Now we should be able to access essentially the test RPC via the Web3 sort of package, or the Web3 object, which is available to us via Metamask. So if I do Web3, I can do .earth.accounts. Web3 is undefined. I missed essential little things. Window.web3.earth.accounts. Okay. That is not available. Let's see what we have. Web3.earth is undefined. That's not a great start. Let's just try refreshing the page, because I might have visited that page before it was actually installed. Let's try again. So if I do, I wonder if Web3 is actually available to me now. It is actually. So we do web3.earth.accounts, and there we go. We have access to our account. Now, if I'm correct, you can access that via window web3.earth.accounts as well. So in our application, or sort of a little web application, we actually want to do it through the window rather than calling it directly. Now that's kind of important for when we're actually setting up our application, because we want to actually ensure that the Metamask plugin is in fact installed. So that's something that we want to check on first pass. Okay, so what I have next is a completely blank sort of project in Atom. Now it doesn't have to be Atom, it's just an editor that I've actually become quite fond of recently. So what I need to do now is basically create a project or structure that I'm going to create basically a web application that can interact with Metamask, and through Metamask we can interact with the Ethereum network. I'm not going to do much today in regards to sort of like contract development. I'm just going to sort of get everyone going with how to interact with the Web3 sort of application or the Web3 platform, so we can make calls back and forth to the Ethereum network. Okay. So the first thing we need to do, or in this case what I'm going to do, is I'm going to create sort of an npm grunt package. It's just going to be a very basic web page with some JavaScript, HTML and CSS, nothing fancy, just to keep things very simple. Now I could do a couple of little things to actually sort of skip this, such as generating a package.json using the npm init, I think it's -yes, which will generate a package.json for me, like so. But I already have one predefined, and I'll just cover that very briefly. So I already have a package.json generated. Now I'm going to replace this with my own. So there's mine, which is just going to be called Learning Solidity version 1.00, and we're going to have some dev dependencies. Now we've only got some very basic dev dependencies here. The reason that I use these specific dependencies, we use basically grunt connect to allow us to generate sort of a HTTP server which we can serve the content on, so we can test this locally rather than having to access sort of just local files. We have grunt.js hint. This is just a little tool I like to use just to obviously point out any JavaScript errors before I can see them on the browser, or before that I'd actually try and compile them and then display them on the browser. And then just grunt watch. It'll just constantly watch a directory for me, any modifications I made. It will then constantly try and recompile it, or more specifically keep running the JS hints on it for me. Now we have that defined, what we need to do is then set up our grunt project, in essence. So to do that, you could again use sort of like a grunt init, and then you'd obviously require a template and so forth. But for now, I'm actually just going to create the file very simply with just grunt file.js. Okay, and again, I'm just going to copy and paste an example I've already generated. Now, this is to coincide with what I already had set up in the package.json. In our grunt sort of configuration, we're going to create some tasks, or load some tasks. We're going to basically allow us to access watch and connect. We don't really need JS hint. I'm going to register a task which essentially runs connect, so it will run the sort of the web client for us, and then watch all the essentially are packaged for modifications. Our connect is set up just to run on port 8000. Any hostname will do, and we're going to use the base directory, so this directory, to serve content from. And then all we're going to do is be watching the files in scripts/star.js. So we're going to need a directory called scripts. Everything in there which ends in a JS sort of file will be watched. We're going to run the task.js hint on that directory as well, just to catch any sort of bugs I might leave in. And that is basically it in a nutshell. Now, because we're going to be serving content from this, we're going to need a index.html. Index.html. We're also going to be having a little bit of CSS in it as well, just so it just doesn't look completely naff. I'm going to create a new directory on that called styles. And that is the base of our project. Now, because we have all that already set up, we can then automatically just run grunt, which should run the default, if I'm correct, which will run the watcher as well as connect. Now, if I've done that right, no, I have not. What has gone wrong there? Unable to find local grunt. So have I created the grunt file.js, package.js? I have screwed something up there, I think. Grunt.js. Ah, I didn't save that or that. Let's just open that again. So if I now run grunt again, it should. unable to find local grunt. Still can't find my local grunt. JS. That should be correct. I'm not sure why that's throwing an error for me. I actually do. I've got a very basic thing where I was supposed to run the npm installation for it. So npm install, which will basically go and get all the dependencies that I need to run this. Because the dependencies for grunt don't actually exist, it can't actually run them. So now it's installed, hopefully grunt should be able to run. There we go. And a very minor mistake from myself there. So if now I try and access localhost 8000, that is basically our web application. Obviously we're not returning anything because it's just a blank HTML page at the moment. Now I am just going to save a little bit of time. I'm going to copy and paste some project code in for myself. Now I'm going to jump over to my HTML and just copy in a few basic bits and pieces. I'm also going to copy over a style as well. It's only a very basic style where I just introduce a spacer. So styles.css, add a spacer in. Now, because that's on constant watch, hopefully we have a very basic setup. Now, I haven't actually introduced the JavaScript at the moment, which is kind of why nothing is displaying. Okay, so what we're going to do for this tutorial is simply show you the basic information of the account. We're going to show you the account address and the account Ethereum contained within the address. Now within this example I've actually already provided a very basic sort of check on a couple of things. Now the first thing you notice here on the right hand side is basically, probably zoom in for that as well, is me simply just checking to see if the type of window.web3 is undefined or not. Now what I'm doing there is just basically checking to see if the Metamask plugin is installed and Web3 is available to us. If so, I'm going to be getting the balances from the Web3, which is what this function is here. If the Web3 is undefined, I'm going to hide no Metamask, which is what that is there. And then if it isn't installed, it's going to hide this one. So obviously if it isn't installed, display this. If it is installed, it will display this. So let's just jump back into Atom and I'll start doing a little bit of JavaScript to get things going. Now obviously in our scripts we simply need a little file called new file metamask.js. I didn't really want to go too much into sort of like coding the HTML and CSS for this tutorial because it's not really what I'm trying to achieve with these tutorials. It's more about how to interact with the components. I did say from the original outset that I would be teaching these, or I would be basically trying to teach these tutorials with the mindset of that people would have already know HTML and CSS and so forth. So my apologies if I'm going a bit too fast for some people. Now we want to check, as previously stated in the sort of page here, that we want to check to see if the actual Metamask is installed. Now I am running a very basic sort of implementation of Bootstrap and jQuery with this. Obviously it'd be a lot nicer if I did it in Angular or React or something like that, but I didn't want to overwhelm people who didn't understand these sort of JavaScript libraries too well. I always felt that jQuery was an easy thing to understand, so that's kind of why I've gone with it. Okay, so the first thing that we kind of need to do with it is we kind of need to run our JavaScript once the document has finished loading, because obviously once everything's loaded, such as the extensions, we can then check to see if the components have been loaded appropriately. So the first thing we need to do is document.ready and execute our function. Now obviously I could do this with a bit of lambda, but for now I'm going to keep it very sort of native. Now we want to do the simple check as previously mentioned before. So if type of window.web3 is not equal to undefined, else do something else. And the first thing we want to do is obtain or use the selector no meta-mask and then simply hide. And then in the case that the Web3 object is not available to us, we want to do has metamask.hide. Now, like I previously mentioned, we're checking to see, it's kind of like a we're checking to see in a negative context, or almost in essence a double negative, not equal to undefined, and then we hide no MetaMask, else we hide has MetaMask. So by that what I mean is, if I refresh this, because MetaMask is installed, this displays correctly. Now if I go into my extensions manager, disable MetaMask, reload the page, it's no longer installed, and that's a simple way to check to see if MetaMask is installed. So I'll re-enable that and then jump back. Now I'm just going to check that I'm still logged in. Test, and there we go. Now the next thing I want to do is display the account that we are logged in with. Now it's key to note that I've had a few problems with MetaMask, and I've been looking around the sort of GitHub repositories for this, and if I'm correct, there is no actual way of obtaining all the accounts that you have logged in on your MetaMask. You can only obtain the current account. So for instance, if you had multiple accounts here, you can only get the current one. Okay, so to do that, we obviously have this code of get balances. Now what this is doing is essentially first getting the Web3 current provider. Now what we're doing with the current provider is then passing it to a new instance of Web3, and then from there we are simply calling earth.get accounts, and then we're passing in the function which is going to have the two parameters of error and accounts. So that's obviously going to be remapped in a sort of promise sort of way. And then once that's executed, we have then the ability to iterate over those accounts, but those accounts will only ever be, or should only ever be, a length of 1, unless that is ever changed. This is kind of why this is a handy bit of code. So if that is ever changed, hopefully that will deal with it. The next thing is then to get the balance of each of the accounts, or the only account which is available to us. We pass the account ID in, which is obviously going to be the index of accounts, and then simply return again with another promise. So that's obviously only ever going to be executed once the request has finished, and then simply we're going to call this function add balance. Now add balance is a custom function that I actually added, which will just simply render a sort of a list item. Now it's not obviously that complicated, but I didn't want to include it in here because it wasn't directly relative to the calls being made to either the Web3 object or any sort of Ethereum based call. Okay, so now if I jump back into into our little metamask.js, the next thing we want to do is add the function get balances. Again, we're passing in the provider, and then we are simply making a call to var. Well, first we're basically instantiating our new instance of Web3. So we're going to call it earth web3 is equal to new web3, and we're going to pass in the provider. Now the provider is going to be passed in from this function, or this line here, which show essentially we know MetaMask is available to us, and we can then go ahead and call get balances and pass in web3.current provider, which is the available provider to us. So now we have the Ethereum Web3 provider available to us. We can now use it to make calls. So earth web3.earth.get accounts, and then our function. So that's the error if there is one, and accounts, it should be the returning object once that promise has finished executing. So the next thing we want to do is be able to iterate over the accounts. And in fact, what I'll do is I'll show you in the console.log what actually is returned. Okay, so if I now inspect that page, go to console, refresh it, we can actually see that we get an array of only of length 1, which is starting with 0xFCCE, and is in fact this address up here, so 0xFCCE. So we know that we're actually able to make calls to MetaMask. The next thing we want to do is be able to make calls to the Ethereum network, and we do that by, if I go back into our MetaMask, again, you don't have to iterate over each of the accounts. You could just simply say account 0, but like I say, this is kind of future proofing just in case they do ever implement it. I equals 0, I is less than accounts.length, and I plus to increment over each of the accounts. The next thing we want to do is var count is equal to counts I. Then we just simply want to call earth web3.earth get balance. I think I can just simply call the count function, see, promise again, balance, and then we want to call our function, or our basically our printing sort of mechanism. But for now, again, I'm going to just do a console.log just to show you what that looks like. So if I dump out a balance there, hopefully we should have quite a long or quite big value. Now we do have not a bigger value as I thought it'd be. We have basically an object which is, I think, in we. So that should be, I think it should be longer than that. I think Metamask may trim it. But either way, what we should have is essentially a balance of 1 and a lot of zeros. Right, so let's just jump in to the Metamask again, and let's actually convert that to an ether value. So we can do that by accessing the Web3, the Earth Web3 provider, and we can do say from we, and we can simply say balance and ether. So hopefully when I print that out now, it should say 100. So there we go, value of 100, which is kind of exactly what we're after. So the next thing that we want to do is simply be able to print out our balance. Now we do that by simply appending to the balances, which is a sort of, correct, as a div inside one of these. There we go. So it's just simply a div, and we want to append sort of like an element within that with jQuery. So to do that, I am actually going to copy and paste this because this is a bit of a sort of a long function call. So we jump back to Metamask, and I'm going to paste in a function called getAddBalance. Now this is a bit of a hacky way to do it. I wouldn't personally advise doing it along this route, but it kind of works. So I'm just going to pass in add balance count, and then hopefully that should have worked. Now I didn't know if I actually need to pass in a count at that point. It should be available to it within that scope. There's only one way to find out, I suppose. So if I get rid of that, we shouldn't need that anymore. Let's just check that I'm actually printing it correctly. That should be. And there we go. We now have an account available, which is our account. We note that it's got 100 ether in, and I've also added a little button called send. It doesn't actually do anything, but it was something I was going to actually lead on to within the next tutorial, so I can actually have a little prompt there where we could send ether to an account through the Metamask plugin. But that in a nutshell is the very sort of basics of how to get going with the Metamask plugin and sort of integrating and connecting with the Ethereum network. Now obviously I've done this with the test RPC. This does work absolutely fine with the live network. Obviously if you are developing something, you probably want to be able to test it with the test network first, just to ensure that everything works correctly, and obviously save yourself a bit of gas cost when you're actually testing these things. Now, I hope you found this useful. I do apologize if I was a bit sort of light or skipped a lot of the detail on various things, because like I said, I didn't really want to go into too much detail with HTML, CSS and JavaScript. I just wanted to give sort of a very light, lucid sort of overview of them, just so we can kind of make some a little bit more progression in the next tutorial. I'm not unfortunately going to do any tutorials on HTML, CSS or JavaScript. I will just kind of expand on what I've actually started within this tutorial. Now, I hope you found this useful. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you would like to know more, or would you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the comments box down below. I'll leave all the links in the description box for things such as Metamask, Grunt and NPM, so if you actually want to check those out and read up on them a little bit more. And if you are interested in seeing or keeping up to date with any of the other tutorials I plan to produce in regards to this sort of like a tutorial series, hit the subscribe button and you'll be kept up to date with when I release my latest videos. But for now, I hope you found this useful, and I'll catch you next time.